Mana sini?
Danny, can you hear us?
Yeah, no, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Great.
Go ahead.
We were just saying welcome to everyone. And Danny, are you ready to kick us off?
Oh yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Thank you so much. Thank you. Peace, and blessings, everybody. It's such a blessing to be with you tonight. Hopefully 2024 is off to a great start for each of you. For those of us, for those joining us from the East Coast to Midwest, I hope you're safe, warm, and comfortable. And for all those hailing from warm places like Florida, California, or wherever the weather is nice, soak up some warmth. For the rest of us, yeah, we're starting this new year full of promise. Not promise that anyone made or is making to us, but promise that we're making to ourselves, right? That the world will hear our cries, hear our demands. We're promising ourselves that our fight to end the condemnation, to end the torture, to end the sentencing of death by incarceration to human beings, many of whom are our families and loved ones, our community members, will not be any longer fought in a soundproof bubble, right? In the confines of American courts and politics, but will be fought in the global arena, right? Of humanity versus barbarity. We fight our fight now in solidarity with the rest of the world community who believe in redemption, who don't believe in torture, and who don't share America's criminal, legal, and political belief that some human beings and some communities, in fact, are disposable, right? And so we thank you for joining us this evening in a conversation about our international push to change our future over here and to change the future of our loved ones on the inside. Many of us know what it's like to have a loved one, condemned to die in prison. And for a long time, we didn't know if we could have the power to change because we were made to feel so small, so outnumbered. When we marched, when we rallied, when we protested about it, we often made to feel as if we're on the fringe, right? We're just a bunch of rabble rousers and noisemakers, but we've learned, that actually we are in the majority. Now we have learned from traveling to the rest of the world that nowhere else in the world sentences people the way America sentences people, to indefinite long-term sentences without any reasonable opportunity for release that exceeds life expectancy. The rest of the world are in solidarity with us. And so actually America is on the fringe. America is extreme, right? And we are in harmony with the rest of the community when we ask for parole eligibility, when we ask for a sentence that reflects the human capacity for redemption. And so without getting too wordy, we just want to say that, we have late last year in October, a delegation made up of family members, right, of loved ones who were condemned, people who were formerly condemned themselves, lawyers and activists and friends and comrades and people, just well-meaning people, forces of goodwill, got together and made a push out to the rest of the world, went to Geneva to speak directly to the Human Rights Council in the United Nations and bring our issues over there. And I won't get into what became of that. I will leave that to our beloved Asta to talk about that a little bit. But I do want to say that we have a robust and exciting, agenda for us tonight, and that we hope everybody will enjoy. Tonight we're going to have a panel discussion that includes some of our delegates, some of the people that went over there, speaking up for us. It's going to include members of the coalitions that make up, or organizations that make up this coalition that's making this push across the world. Organizations such as the Amistad Law Project, the Abolitionist Law Center, Center for Constitutional Rights, Releasing Aging People in Prison, Drop LWOP, right? CCWP, the Sentencing Project, Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration, and the organization just continue to attract to this movement. Our coalition continues to grow, and that's what we hope to do tonight, is to connect with you all and grow this movement, grow this push for humanity in America's sentencing policies. Tonight, we're going to have a panel discussion. After that panel discussion, we're going to have audience Q&A, where we're going to open it up for, questions, have a conversation with you. We're going to do breakouts, where we're going to huddle up in smaller groups, where we could really get a little more intimate, right? And share our thoughts and feelings, our visions, our ideas, our grievances, right? As well as our hopes. And then we're going to come back and we're going to process that as a larger group. And then we're going to reflect together and close out, right? And hopefully, you'll stay for the duration, because it's going to be rich and rewarding, and we cannot be successful without all of you. And so we need everybody, all hands on deck with this. So bear with us, suffer us for an hour and a half, become informed of what's going on, of this new chapter of the fight to end death by incarceration. Be enlightened, be ignited, be emboldened, and let's make change. Without further ado, I'll pass it to Asta.
Thanks so much, Gani, and thank you for that really great introduction to the coalition, to this group. It's always so great to be in conversation with you. My name is Asta. I'm a staff attorney at the Center for Constitutional Rights, and I had the privilege and honor of traveling with this group of people who you'll hear from later this evening to Geneva in October of last year. And as Gani said, we're here today to talk about death by incarceration. And it's so wonderful to see so many of you all in this call today, in this meeting, in this town hall, because it takes a really big and powerful movement to end this sentence. And you all are part of that movement. And I think it's an urgent goal that we have to end death by incarceration, but it is also one that requires a long-term strategy. And so we're here today to talk about one tool in this toolbox that we have, which is international advocacy, and in particular advocacy with the UN. And I can share a little bit about, why we chose to engage with this. But I first, want to acknowledge that international advocacy and the UN in particular have not always been and are not always a tool for liberation. I think we understand that right now, with the genocide that's happening in Gaza, we are asking ourselves questions about the role of the international community and the role of the UN. And so it's not always a tool for liberation, but a powerful movement, a movement like this one, can use the UN as a tool in our movements for liberation. And so we wanted to see, as a coalition, based on our past experience, whether we could take this issue of death by incarceration, life sentences, life without parole sentences, sentences that exceed life expectancy, to take them to the international stage, put the US on trial, gain some traction, and bring it back and incorporate it into our movements here. And like I said, this is a long-term struggle. The UN is not going to give us immediate wins, but we need to experiment, right? So it's one of many tools. So we all got together about 2 years ago, and we decided that the first step that we would take was to submit a complaint to the UN about death by incarceration. We submitted this in September of 2022, and it included over 40 testimonies from people currently serving the sentence across the country. I can share a link in a moment to that complaint for those who haven't. Oh, thanks, Nikki. For those who haven't seen it before. And just to go over some of the points that we make in the complaint, we really wanted the United Nations to understand that these sentences are racist, that they're a form of racism, and that they're a product of a racially discriminatory criminal legal system. So that's the framing of the complaint. We also wanted the United Nations to understand and to recognize that these sentences are a form of torture in violation of international human rights law. And the reason we argue they're a form of torture is because they deprive people of the right to hope for a life outside of prison. And this right, the right to hope, is something that the international community has understood as a right, as a human right. And when you deprive someone of that right to hope, that it constitutes torture, the international community and international courts have recognized this. So we wanted to bring that to the US's practice and policy of death by incarceration. We describe in this complaint that these sentences, that they don't serve the purposes that they're purported to serve. So this idea of these sentences making us safer, they don't. These extreme sentences don't make our communities safer. So we have that in the complaint. And then finally, and I think this is something that the language of death by incarceration does, and we wanted to show this in our complaint, is that the sentence, by sentencing mostly people of color and mostly Black people to spend the rest of their lives in prison, this is not a life sentence. This is a death sentence. It is a sentence to premature death in prison. And so the law needs to see it not as a sentence to life, but as a sentence to death. And so we wanted to do a bit of reframing in our complaint, and we wanted the international community to take on this language of death by incarceration, to move away from this language of life sentence and talk about death by incarceration. And so much of this was inspired by the work that so many of you have done. And Ghani can talk a bit too about the Right to Redemption Committee and how they in 2011, talked about the phrase death by incarceration while many of them were incarcerated, and the importance of taking it to the international community and taking it to the UN. So this was a complaint filed in 2022, and since then we've actually been very successful in getting the UN to listen and to issue statements based on things that we've submitted. So I just wanted to share what we've gotten from the UN since submitting this complaint. So first, I wanted to share this report that came out actually a few weeks before we went to Geneva by the UN Expert Mechanism on Law Enforcement and Racism, who visited the US. This UN mechanism visited the US in May of 2023, and actually some of us on this call met with the members of this UN body, and they issued a report that, first of all, recognizes the phrase death by incarceration. It's the first time in the UN that the phrase death by incarceration, to refer to what until now has been called life sentences or life without parole sentences, that the UN applies this term to those sentences. It also, and I think really importantly, acknowledges that these sentences are a form of cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment in violation of the international prohibition on torture, that all prison sentences in the US should include parole eligibility, always within a reasonable number of years, and always below life expectancy. So this was the first statement that we got from the UN as a result of our advocacy, really taking on this language and these concepts that we had wanted them to incorporate into international law. The second thing that I wanted to share was this from the UN Human Rights Committee, which was a statement that came, a recommendation to the US that came as a direct result of our trip to Geneva, as a direct result of the advocacy that people, here on the town hall today can share about, that they did in Geneva. The UN Human Rights Committee issued this recommendation to the US, and now the US has to follow up on this. It has to report back on this. And the recommendation is that the US should make parole available and accessible to all, including those sentenced to life in prison, and that it should consider establishing a moratorium on life without parole sentences. So this was, again, directly the result of the advocacy of the people that you'll hear from today, of their direct communication with the UN Human Rights Committee, and we got this really powerful and important statement as a result of that. And then finally, I wanted to share this statement from the UN Special Rapporteur on Racism, who, after a visit to the US, where she met with some people again on this call, issued this statement, again, using the language of death by incarceration sentences, and saying that without a chance of parole, these sentences reduce prison to a tool of segregation and exploitation. So again, a really powerful statement as a direct result of the advocacy that people on this call have done. And I just want to end by, saying that the UN can sort of feel far away and not always implementing sort of the recommendations that come out of it. And I think that's true. And so it's our role as part of this movement to think about the best ways to incorporate these really powerful statements into our local and state and national advocacy. And we saw this happen. We're seeing this happen with the solitary confinement, the movement to end solitary confinement. In 2011, the UN issued a report saying that solitary confinement beyond 15 days was a form of torture. And that report has been used for local and state advocacy to push for changes in law. The UN historically has said that LWOP, when imposed on youth, and the death penalty when imposed on youth, is a violation of the prohibition on torture. And those statements have pushed the US Supreme Court to call for a reduction of those sentences. And although solitary confinement has not ended in the US and juvenile LWOP hasn't, these are sort of really important tools to use and incorporate and take advantage of within our movement. So I think that's the question for us today. What are we going to do now? How are we moving forward? We have these wins, we have these statements from the UN, and where are we going to take them? So I'll pass it back to you, Ghani.
Wow, thank you so much for that really thorough breakdown and update on everything that's been going on. And everybody, Asta is an attorney who with the Center for Constitutional Rights, who has been very, very central to this movement, very central to helping to draft and file the first ever, complaint, or petition in the United Nations to end death by incarceration sentences. And so, we just, Asta, we thank you for all your hard work, and all your advocacy. The movement, that we probably wouldn't be at this point if it wasn't for the energy that you've given to this cause. But we want to talk to our folks, who went over there across seas to advocate for us as part of the delegation. We have Demetra Seymour, who's an ambassador with the Visiting Project, spent 25 years of life without parole / death by incarceration sentence, has been home for 10 months only, and is enjoying his blessing of freedom while doing his best to serve others. We also have Lisette Nieves, who serves as a community leader for Release Aging People in Prison, or RAP, and she joined the RAP community in 2020 to get involved with the campaign for the elder parole bill as a ray of light to bring her brother home. And he's been in prison for 42 years, since the age of 16, and is not eligible for parole until 2031. And Lisette has a powerful story to tell, and in a very powerful way. So we look forward to being in conversation with Lisette, and we look forward to being in conversation with Kelly Savage Rodriguez, who is the Drop LWOP coordinator for California Coalition for Women Prisoners, CCWP. And Kelly has been incarcerated for 23 years herself till she got her life sentence or death by incarceration sentence commuted by the governor in December of 2017, which, by the way, Kelly, is the same month and year that I was released myself, after 30 years serving on a death by incarceration sentence. And so, I'm definitely in solidarity with you, Kelly, and we have the incomparable Mama Pat with us too. And Mama Pat has been a stalwart champion to end death by incarceration as one of the founders and heads of the Human Rights Coalition, one of the first organizations in this movement to embrace human rights, actually use it as part of their title, in a lot of ways was precocious, you know what I'm saying? And in sowing the seeds for what we have now. And Mama Pat fought doggedly to get her son Shakabuna out of prison from a death by incarceration sentence that he was serving until he was about 16, since he was about 16 or 17 years old. And she never gave up. And after 33 years of him serving that sentence, she finally was successful at freeing her son. And now he's running the Human Rights Coalition with us. So Mama Pat, we look forward to talking with you, to talking with Kelly and Lisette and Demetra C. And how about we just get right into it, y'all? And let's talk and bring everybody up to speed on what's going on. I'm starting with you, and this is how we're gonna do it. I know I kind of said a little bit about who you are and where you're from, but just remind us and what organization you represent. But as you start, your spill, remind us of who you are and the organization you represent, and tell us how long you've been doing this work, right? And what brought you into this work, right? And what you think are the key components to this work. So again, tell us who you are, the organization you represent, how long you've been doing this work, what brought you into this work, and what for you are the key components to doing this work. Let's start with you, Mama Pat.
Hi, Gani. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you all again. And as I said before, I was so honored to be invited as part of the delegation to go to the Geneva Convention. Yeah, I'm Mama Pat. And I got into this work. I'm with the Human Rights Coalition, first of all, and the Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration, CABI. So I'm representing two groups. I got into this work because, as Gani said, my son was sentenced to life in prison, death by incarceration at the age of 17. And we started on this journey. I started on this journey feeling that I need to protect my son. He was 17 when he entered into prison, and I didn't know anything about the prison system. I didn't know anything about the judicial system. I was just a regular person who went to work, came home, and took care of my kids. So all of this was brand new to me. And I just felt like I had failed as a parent, that he was sentenced to life in prison. I didn't quite know what it was at that time. Like I said, it was all new to me, and I couldn't get a straight answer from anybody about what life without parole was. But anyway, I was more so worried about my son being harmed in prison because he was so young. And when he met up with a famous person, I say he's famous in his own right, who's not with us now, but Russell Maroon Schultz was a political prisoner. And he and Russell Maroon Schultz and other prisoners such as Celine started the Human Rights Coalition and basically got the families out here involved. And all of the families that I met and who were involved with the Human Rights Coalition were out here fighting for the human rights of our children in prison. Gani asked what was a key factor. That is a key factor, that family members are in this with their loved ones. When their loved ones go to prison, they go with them. Every night I was worried about my son. If I didn't get a letter or phone call, I imagine all sorts of horrible things that could have happened to him. When I found out he was in solitary confinement, I was just so upset about that. So my main goal in the beginning was to protect my son. I couldn't protect him when he was out here on the streets as a teenager. I wanted to do everything I could to watch over him and protect him inside the prison. Later on, I realized that his sentence, life without parole, wasn't anything that I could conceive. I realized that he was going to die in prison. And we started another organization called CABI, the Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration. And that organization is made up of family members again, who are out here fighting for their loved ones to get a second chance, and the bias laws and rules that put them in prison and try to keep them in prison until they die. We're out here again fighting to bring our loved ones home and give them second chances. So that's kind of where I started. My son is home, but I'm still here fighting for all the men and women that I've met along the way. It's been since 2001 that we started the Human Rights Coalition. That's almost 22 years ago. I've met a lot of people inside the prisons, and I've seen a lot of people come home, and they're all wonderful, intelligent, smart, just like Ghani, just so lovable and humane and caring people that have come home. And they all deserve that second chance sooner than they got it. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing. That's what I've been doing. And I hope to continue this work and bring a lot more home. Thank you. We can't hear you, Ghani.
Yeah, no, I had to unmute. Thank you so much, Mama Pat. Mama Pat, we love you. And, you know, like so many other mothers that's been fighting, I think what keeps us strong, you know, is your example, you know, because you could have just as easily, you know, as when Shakabuna came home, you know, just hang up your hat and be like, you know, okay, I put my work in, got my son home, and that's it. But since Shakabuna has been home, you know, you're still fighting. You know, you were fighting for others to come home before him, and you're still fighting for others to come home.
I
So
still got some sons left in there.
that's right. We were, all of us were seen as your sons. You saw us that way, and that's why we call you Mama Pat. You know what I'm saying? Because you're a mother to all of us, you know, and to the struggle. And so bless your heart, Mama Pat. And so Lisette, you're next on my screen. So why not we just go over to you. And I know, you know, I gave a really brief introduction to everybody, right? There's no, that was no means in my intention to try to slight your narrative. So take this opportunity to say more, anything that I've missed. Say more, Lisette, you know, to remind us about the organization and all of that, how long you've been doing this work, what brought you into this work, what are key components to this work, and whatever else you want us to know about you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was floored by this opportunity to advocate for my brother on an international level. My name is Lisette. I am a community leader with Release Aging People in Prison, RAP. I started this work in 2020. RAP was, I became familiar with RAP prior to getting involved with the organization, but when I read something like they were working on the bills and the bills didn't pass, and you know, I got discouraged right away. So I kind of just like did not pursue exploring RAP a little deeper. It was reintroduced to me by someone else, the organization, and I reached out to The organization didn't know what to expect in 2020 during the pandemic, and immediately was embraced by this community. My brother's, like Ghani said, has been incarcerated for 42 years. He went in at the age of 16. Since February 20th, 1982, my brother has been incarcerated. And I don't know if you can see this picture, but this is the baby, right? This is the child that has been incarcerated for 42 years. He is currently 58 years old. And he was handed a DBI sentence of 49 and a half years to life at the age of 17. And you think he is now 58. So I've been doing this work for 3 years. And he's 58 now, which coincides with the average life expectancy for incarcerated individuals in New York State. And it's terrifying to me that my brother could potentially come home in a box. But we are fighting the fight, and getting involved with rap gave me one thing that I did not have before, and that was hope. I felt hopeless. I felt like, I remember running into a family friend, and, she was like, he's still locked up. And I'm like, yeah. And she was like, there must be something we could do about it. And I was like, we is a lot of people, because I haven't seen you around for a long time, and when we finish this conversation, you're going to walk away and live your life. And I might not see you again, but I'm still fighting this fight with my brother. And in my mind, I was like, there's nothing I could do. I think a part of me accepted this, that some way, somehow, I probably convinced myself that this was just par for the course. This is what happens if you're poor, Black, Puerto Rican from the Bronx. But getting involved with rap was a wake-up call for me. It was like, I don't have to just sit back and be passive and let my brother rot in prison. There is something that I can do. I can share his story and advocate for him. And not just him, but him and who he represents, because he's one of so many. And it's ridiculous that a 16-year-old could be held accountable for 42 plus years, and he is not eligible for parole for another 7 years. He's not eligible for parole for 2031. And the way New York State operates, he can go before the parole board and be denied. Why? Because of the nature of his crime. The one thing he cannot change. And be hit with another 2 years, and another 2 years, and another 2 years, and never see the light of day. And the thought of that is terrifying. So the work for me is about advocacy with legislators. This was new to me. I didn't mess with elected officials, didn't really respect them. But in doing that, I didn't hold them accountable. And that is very common in our communities. In New York City and Manhattan, they get things done because they hold their elected officials accountable. So it was an education in legislative advocacy that I was not interested in before, but I became interested because this, to me, was a way to bring my brother home. Advocating to pass the elder parole bill. And the elder parole bill would, when passed, if you're 55 and you've done at least 15 years of your sentence, you will be eligible to see the parole board. It's not even you gonna be released automatically. There is still a process. This is common sense legislation. It's about canvassing. It's about sharing the story. It's about building community. And for me, one of the most important things is instilling hope. Not only for me, but for like everyone that I encounter. And being part of this community has taken this issue with, I've talked about it, but a long time, when you're dealing with an incarcerated loved one, it's a very isolating experience. You're afraid that people will judge you based on what your loved one has done. And it's not about that. It's not about that. It's important to uplift his story and let folks know what is going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisette. It's just, and Lisette, thank you for not, allowing the self-doubt that you started with, the questions about what you could do, what you can't do and couldn't do, and not knowing if you could do anything, be the defining, thing for you. You know what I'm saying? Look how far you came from that point to now. You went from wondering what you could do to going across the globe, you know what I'm saying, and speaking directly to the United Nations and doing much more that you probably didn't even touch on. And so, sometimes it starts with powerful questions like the one you had, Kelly. How you doing, Kelly? Could you tell us a little more about, how you got into this work? What are the key components in this work for you? How long you've been doing it? Tell us a little more about yourself.
Thank you so very much. First, I want to thank everyone for being here. Sorry, a little ill, so hope everybody can understand me. I served 23 years in California's prisons, and knew, immediately like something has to give when it came to like just basic information. What does a sentence even mean? What does it look like? Why do they keep offering us these options of, eventually they have, a board hearing for you, but yet other people say, no, you're going home in a pine box. Like, what does that look like? And so it was gathering information. It was screaming at anyone who would listen, what about the middle? Like, everyone is forgetting about the people who aren't parole eligible or serving actual death sentence. And I absolutely get it, but those 250 years, the LWOP sentences, the 400 years, like those sentences are absolutely beyond extreme. There's not livable. There's no reason to sentence people like that, except that they know that their evidence isn't exactly the way it should be. And so they stack sentences. So in case you win on appeal, they have multiple sentences they can get people with. And it's absurd. It's absurd how it happens. And so looking at even how people get sentences, how are they always remembering automatically, ultimate respect and attention needs to go to those victims in that process. It is about them and not the person, serving the sentence. But at the same time, we have to have compassion and understanding and empathy across the board for all and understand all dynamics of a situation. And the truth is, they don't care about that. The truth is, many people inside prisons are sitting there being held accountable for the actions of another. And when that happens, it makes the system so much more foggier, on the baseline. Like, I hear from people on a daily basis, because I am blessed enough to do this work. I hear from people on a daily basis, you would not believe, like, how they stacked my sentence, or, how I wasn't even there. I wasn't the actual person, like all of these situations. And sadly, it is so common because it is about creating incarceration and creating that fear factor that took place in the 90s that got most of these people incarcerated. It wasn't about keeping the community safe. It wasn't about looking at these individuals and their accountability and their situation. It's about incarceration and how quickly they can incarcerate. And so in doing that, I was able to start to connect some dots and realize that some men were doing some work, and I'm, getting louder and louder, like I need people to listen, and realizing that the men basically forgot the women in the process here in California. And so we're like, well, then we need to figure out something on our own. If you created this book, you're doing all these things, but yet you didn't invite one woman to participate. So we decided to do a storytelling project that would look at what it looks like to be incarcerated in California with an LWOP sentence, and how it feels like, is that person a mother? Is that person somebody who was there, as a first time offender, looking at all of their situations and hearing from them. And so it turned into an art exhibit. And that's what started a lot of our movement. And then it turned into the Drop LWOP Coalition as a whole. I was still incarcerated at the time. Pushing the movement on both ends. I was sending surveys to other institutions, asking them questions, trying the best I could to gather information just to understand and figure out how to support and push back against the system, who was saying we were so dangerous that we couldn't even meet in one location together at one time. Like, that was forbidden. And so in doing that, we had to find other avenues, because we were going to make sure we met. And whether it was on the yard or in the chapel, anything we could to make sure that we got people together. And so in having the opportunity to do the storytelling project and getting that voice out there, Drop LWOP ended up working with multiple groups to develop the Drop LWOP organization, which was, amazing. It's not just California. We're working with multiple states and incorporating things that they're doing and educating around that as well. And it started with rallies. It started with communication with the governor's office. They were having us collect letters inside about like what we felt about the sentence or what we wanted to tell the governor. And we created books and things like that to educate them about who we were and what we thought about different topics and how we wanted to give back to our communities and who we were as people. And in that, all of those letters were delivered by these coalition members, these family members, because there wasn't LWOPs out here to do the work. So it was family members, and they took that opportunity to drop off a box of information to the governor to say, pay attention to these people and look at their situations and listen to their loved ones who are outside during these rallies and things like that. And that really pushed. And we were lucky and blessed enough to have a lot of our individuals commuted. We were lucky to have Governor Brown in California that really assisted us. And by then, I was blessed enough to get out and be able to work directly with this work. I work with the people inside. It's not just within California. I get people from multiple states. And then after getting out, the National LWOP Leadership Council formed, which is where I've worked with Ghani at. And I've just been blessed to be able to work with them as well. They're all formerly incarcerated LWOPs who work on many levels in multiple states. We now have at least 8 states that we're working with closely, as well as supporting states that don't have representation, and even flying out to be representing there. And so for me, it's about remembering that we have to remember the middle road. We have to remember that all people deserve the opportunity for release. For us in California, they actually use rehabilitation as their motto, yet exclude a large population. And so it's about putting, their words and making it that action that needs to take place. And it's about remembering that the people inside are not the horrible people that a prosecutor said they were. These decisions aren't made by a judge. The judge doesn't get to listen to evidence about a case and say that a person deserves a less sentence. At least in California, they don't have that opportunity. It's up to the prosecutor to decide what they want to go with, and the judge's hands are tied. And so that's really important for people to understand and remember. And so, my job to do that, and I am blessed to be able to do it.
Thank you, Kelly. If someone asks us to close our eyes and imagine an incarcerated person or someone sentenced to death by incarceration, and the first image that comes to our mind is a male, then we need to grow our understanding of the situation. Because if we don't automatically also envision or imagine a woman, somebody's grandmother or daughter or aunt in an orange jumpsuit, you dig what I'm saying, or whatever the color of the prison outfit is in your state, because it's not just a man issue, it's a woman issue too. So thank you for lifting that up as well, Kelly. Demetri Seymour, I'm sorry to put it up against the wire like this, but we are up against the wire in terms of time. And it's another question I want to ask after this, after you talk about, who you are and what are the key components of the struggle is for you, how you got into this struggle, right? And how long you've been into it. There's something else I want to ask after this. So just be mindful of time if you can in your introduction.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I am a female. I'm Demetri Seymour. I served 25 years in prison. I am an ambassador for the Visiting Room Project, and we are a storytelling platform, oral storytelling platform. And I got into this work, first of all, I got into this work 25 years ago. I got into this work when I was first sentenced to life without parole. But I got into it on a personal note. And I want to say that based on what the organization has done for me, the Visiting Room Project, they made me human again. Going through the news media and going through trial, when you facing that type of crime or that type of sentence, you're deemed a monster. People look at you different. But what the Visiting Room Project did was made me human again. And for that, I like to thank the project for that. I also got into this work when, once I got out, another group invested in me, and that was the Louisiana Parole Project. I didn't think that my story was that big. I didn't think my story was unique. Matter of fact, I look at my story as being a norm. It's the norm for women in Louisiana to get sentenced to life incarceration, even defending their self against abusive husbands or boyfriends. They wind up with life imprisonment. And I just want to say, just to keep it brief, because I respect the time constraints, that it was 3 reasons that really is going to keep me into this line of work. Being that I've been out only 10 months, I'm just getting my feet wet. So I really don't know all the lingo and the technology and the advocacy groups, but I feel like the Visiting Room Project is adding an emotional connection with the advocacy and the campaigns. So we can work together with the coalition. I thank you that I was chosen to get on this group, but it was 3 factors that I want to bring out before I close that really got me into this work and got me pushing. I had hope. My hope was on the outside. It was my 2 daughters. They were my hope. But my faith was in God, was in Jesus Christ. That kept me getting up in the morning. That kept me trying, deny you after deny you after deny you, to get out of prison so I can enjoy the rest of my life with my family. In Louisiana, the women, we really don't have a voice right now, or we didn't, but we have some strong voices coming out now, along with myself, and we are gonna finally be heard, because it's always Angola, it's always the men, but they have women in Louisiana. We have the only female prison in Louisiana, the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women. The other places they house women are correctional facilities, but we're labeled the only female prison in Louisiana. And this line of work can only be done by people directly impacted by it, and not being selfish on that matter, but because we know the insides, we know what we face, and we are educating the people that wasn't there, so they're linking arms with us, and that's what makes this movement bigger. I don't have that much to offer, but I believe that I'm passionate enough about my story and about the women that I left behind to help the coalition become one and to get death by incarceration sentences dropped. Thank you.
Thanks, Demetri C. And definitely apologize for misgendering you at the intro. But while we're here with you, Demetri C., can you tell us, what was important for you? What were your expectations really quickly from the UN in going over there to Geneva, and how have you incorporated the outcome of the UN advocacy into your local advocacy, or how do you envision incorporating the UN statements into your local advocacy? If you could say it real quick, we want to get that from everybody before we go to the breakout.
Honestly, I didn't know what to expect being 10 months out, but I've gained so much knowledge about the different aspects of incarceration, death by incarceration. It was a learning experience for me to be over there, to know that this is not a solitary fight. Like, I didn't know that this fight was so much bigger than I am. And I only can thank God for me being a part of this fight and helping out. But what I expected to gain from that, knowledge that I can use on our storytelling platform, actually to be myself and to be more, to bring emotion back to how people look at formerly incarcerated people that's incarcerated now, because they lost the human emotion. We lost that human connection as a human race. We lost that connection. And I think us bringing our stories along with the data and the statistical numbers about incarceration and death by incarceration, just making it human again, because that's what is affecting human beings being locked up. Thank you. We can't hear you. You're still muted.
Mama Pat, what did you expect when you went to the UN, and how do you plan on taking the UN's findings and incorporating it into your local advocacy real quick?
I didn't know what to expect when I went over there. In fact, I was happily surprised to see people sit there and listen to our stories and listen to the testimonies that we gave, to listen to the evidence that we gave, and then to actually take all the information we gave them and ask those questions of United States representatives. So that was like awesome to me. I'd never been there before. I didn't know what to expect, but I am so thrilled that we got our message across and that they delivered it just as though it was coming out of our mouth. So, and then they came over here and paid a visit, actual visit, to learn more about death by incarceration from the prisons here. They didn't come to Philadelphia, but that's okay. But yeah, like Demetri said, I found out so many other people from California, Louisiana, all these other people were affected too. And it wasn't just a Pennsylvania issue. And that we got up there and we just exposed the United States to all the other nations' scrutiny. All the other nations are looking down on the United States and asking them, like, what are you doing? They can't stand up and say, oh, we're the example, America is the example for all other nations. No, they can't do that anymore. what I'm taking away from this is that one thing the Human Rights Coalition has is a newsletter, news magazine that we put out. I put that information in our news magazine to let people on the inside know that people out here are fighting against death by incarceration all the way up to the United Nations. I am with CABI. CABI has a legislative committee, and we go to the different legislators and try to encourage them to vote for our geriatrics bill. Something like the one in New York is a geriatrics bill. And we go to the legislators and try to get them to pass that bill to let people come home who are over 55, who have an illness, or I think it's, I could be wrong, but I think it's been there 25 years. But when we go to those legislators, when we give our testimony to those legislators, I plan to bring that up. Look, we went all the way to the United States, to the United Nations. The world is looking at you. And that's what I have done. That's what I plan to do. Like, people need to know that this is a huge thing. That's not just us. We're not isolated with death by incarceration in just Pennsylvania. It's all over, and everybody's fighting against it.
Thank you so much, Mama Pat. And really, I don't, these, hate to rush these kind of things, because it's so meaningful to hear about what went on and for everybody to hear. But Lisette, I'm gonna have to challenge you to see if you could get it off in like 30 seconds, what you expected and how you plan to use what came out of that in your local struggles.
I would say, like the rest of them, I didn't know what to expect. This was another experience that was an education all unto itself. I didn't know much about the United Nations Human Rights Committee to begin with. But what I would say is that what floored me is that this body saw us. The United States don't see us. And this international body saw us. They saw us, they heard us. The very first question, and mind you, we were part of a delegation that spanned a lot of issues. The very first question that was posed was a DBI question. And we were all just like, you could see the excitement in our group. And that was Representative So. He's the committee member. And then he went back and told them. He was like, remember me? I was the first one to ask questions. Y'all didn't answer now one of my questions, and then hit him with another question. So it was just like, there was this power, that just kind of surged from all of us. We were like, yes, we were heard, we were seen. I think one of the most important things that we need to do in terms of bringing this back is bringing this work to our community, understanding so that they don't feel that isolation that we all thought, right? Like, this is a New York State issue. Let them know that this is a national issue. This is an international issue. And that this is a human rights issue. Death by incarceration is a human rights issue. We have a right to hope. Parole, making sure that we send that message out, that parole should be based on the assumption that you will be released. Give our incarcerated loved ones hope that they will actually be able to go home. I would say it's, building that base, letting the community know that this issue is important. The word DBI, the phrase DBI is now something that you hear more of. It was not something that was promoted and put on a larger scale. And also that the issue of race and the role that it plays in this issue is not something that can be denied. And it's like, I don't remember who said it, but I think it was Mount, but they're watching you. The international community is watching the United States, and reality of the matter is the United States should be ashamed of themselves. And we will use this when we get to the legislators, get in front of the legislators and let them know that this is not just a New York State issue. This is an international issue, and they must act upon the recommendations that the United Nations has made. Done.
Thank you, Lisette. 30 seconds might be a bit oppressive. Kelly, can you do it in 60?
Yeah, absolutely. I did everything I could to try to do research before because I was nervous as hell and trying, but it was so hard even to understand and grasp what was going to happen. Multiple meetings, asking all sorts of silly questions, and absolutely was nothing like I expected. We worked literally from 7 a.m. until 10 at night, like, multiple meetings. Absolutely felt hurt. I felt like every other organization took on issues that belong to us in ways, like as they're bringing up their own issues in their in their areas, they were also talking about their incarcerated people, and bringing up issues like we were for them. And so that was really important to know that we know we can move people. It's a matter of having the stage and educating the family members, as we see with Mama Pat and Lisette, that there's people that are willing, they just don't know how. And so that was really impactful to me, just having the conversation. And of course, we were with some powerful men that are not on the line tonight, that I also want to lift, because like the education element, I thought I was an advocate and realized I am not. I am a baby, and they are my leaders that are going to keep educating me to do better. Yeah, and I just want to shout out to some of them as well, because they weren't here, but they are on those photos you saw at the beginning.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you. Kelly, Lisette, Mama Pat, Demetrius. I could listen to each of y'all, as I'm quite sure all of us can. I'm sure all of us can, for hours. But we want to give everybody a chance to get in this conversation a little bit. Courtney, you want to take it from here and take us into the breakout rooms?
Yeah, thank you so much to all of our panelists and everyone who's here. This is a great turnout. Please stay on if you can, because we want to spend a little bit of time in breakout rooms, probably about 15 minutes, just sort of processing what we've heard thus far and thinking about your own ideas for bringing this into local advocacy. So I will put you into breakout rooms now. If you have any tech issues, hit me up. You should all get an invite to join. Okay, and if you're unassigned, just give me a minute. I will get you into a room. Thanks for your patience. Nikki, I'm assuming as host, you'll stay here.
You're pregnant again?
Hey, everybody. We reflecting and closing out now?
Yep.
All right.
Connie, can I ask you to tell people something that you weren't clear about? Can you tell them how you all started the concept of death by incarceration and ending juvenile life while you were inside? Can you just very quickly?
Just the concept of death by incarceration.
How you were the ones who started it. What started this whole movement?
I mean, for us, behind the walls, we saw one of the main problems that we had to wrestle with, again, is that some of the biggest proponents or strongest advocates of life without parole were opponents of the death penalty, you know, and we considered them comrades. We considered them ideological comrades, you know what I'm saying? Ideological ilk, you know, and so we didn't want to be in a situation where we engaged in public ideological battles or struggles with people fighting to end the death penalty. You know what I'm saying? We believe that the death penalty is wrong on its moral, philosophical face, every which way. But we just didn't think that they necessarily had to like throw us under the bus to make their point. You know what I'm saying? We thought they could have made that point in other ways. But, you know, people fighting against the death penalty was some of the biggest proponents by saying stuff like life without parole is a more humane sentence. It's a better alternative to the death penalty. And we didn't think it was because they didn't care or because they had malice in their heart or anything like that. We just thought that folks probably really believe that life without parole was a more humane sentence. They probably didn't see life without parole as more final and fatal, as just as final and fatal as the death penalty. And I would say more so because, you know, you have more people die serving life without parole sentences than serving the death penalty. In Pennsylvania, for instance, the last person to be executed was 1999, Gary Heidnik. Since then, hundreds and hundreds of people serving death by incarceration sentences have died serving that sentence. So we can make the argument that life without parole is actually more lethal than lethal injection. You understand what I'm saying? And so we said, you know what? Maybe we need to change the language. Maybe we need to like say, you speak, you know, let it be known in a way that conveys the gravity of the sentence. And so we said we called it what it is, death by incarceration. You know, and as far as a term, you know, the term came about because of that realization by us, you know. And so yeah, here we are coming down to the wire. You know, we thank you for having this conversation, but it's not just about, you know, having this conversation. I think it's pretty much preaching to the choir when we talk about the importance of human rights law, right? And making an international push. It's kind of like what Malcolm said, as long as these injustices are labeled by the US as civil rights, and I'm gonna add constitutional rights because life without parole was upheld by the Constitution in Furman versus Georgia and People versus Anderson back in 1972, right? But human rights, you know, is what Malcolm talked about, because, you know, because it when we keep it confined to constitutional rights, civil rights, or US jurisprudence, we kind of like make it a domestic issue, and none of our people from abroad, because of protocol, can be involved in Uncle Sam's domestic problems, is how Malcolm put it, right? And so we need to be in solidarity with the rest of the global community. And so human rights is how we frame this now. But now it's about what we're going to do, y'all. What we're going to do together. How can we leverage the statement that came out of the UN Human Rights Council, right? After our delegation went over there, and Salim and Lisette and Stanley and all of those comrades went over there and Mama Pat, and made such a strong showing, right? What we're going to do to leverage what they were able to get out of the UN. We know that the US don't really respect the UN. So this statement on its own is not going to liberate our people from death by incarceration. What are we going to do to leverage that? How can we weaponize what the UN gave to us, right? How can we make something happen for us? That's what we're talking about doing. And we can't do it fighting in our own silos or on our own. We need to increase our numbers and increase the volume of our demand. We need to turn our demand into a command. And so without, you know, that's right. Half-baked thoughts are totally welcome, and don't worry too much about putting it under. That's right. That's right. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But thank you for coming out and joining us in this conversation tonight. Any closing thoughts? We welcome. Nikki, is there anything you wanted to say on the way out? Because I know, you know, you have been this quiet force of nature, you know, pulling this all together behind the walls. Is there something, I mean, behind the scenes, is there something you want to say before we sign off?
Just thank you, everyone, for coming and being a part of this fight. We will keep in touch with everyone go up to date. And please fill out that form that we're going to put in the chat. Thank you.
Everybody wants to know when we'll get together again. All right.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Be blessed, y'all. When we fight, we win. That's right, Mama Didi. Have a blessed
Thanks,
evening.
everyone.
Have a blessed night, everybody. Love y'all.
Love y'all.
Thank you. Thank you, Gani.
Good night, everybody. Love you guys. Thank
All
you.
right, y'all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good
Thank you.
Good night.